Princess Charlotte carries her grandmother's name, her grandmother's stare, and according to those who watch the Wales family closest, several of her grandmother's instincts. Royal watchers have compared footage of Charlotte and Diana and pointed to matching eye shape, soft gaze, and expressions, while people close to the family have described a shared love of dance and a similar mix of shyness and warmth. Princess Diana never met her granddaughter, and yet the traits kept showing up anyway in a tilt of the head, in a private ballet class, in the way a 10-year-old girl looks at a camera. This is the story of what got passed down, and what it might mean for the little girl third in line to the British throne. Let's start with the thing everyone actually clicked for: the face. Diana had a look. Photographers built entire careers around catching it. Chin dipped slightly, eyes lifted just enough to peer up through the lashes, head tilted a few degrees to one side. The Sun once described it as Diana's distinctive expression, typically featured her looking up through her eyelashes with a slightly tilted head, giving an impression of shyness. It became one of the most photographed expressions of the 20th century. Soft, a little guarded, and somehow completely disarming. People who met her in person said the look worked the same way off camera as it did on it. Now fast forward. Princess Charlotte is standing at a public engagement. Camera flashes going off around her, and she does the exact same thing. Chin down, eyes up, head tilted. Nobody taught her that on purpose. Nobody sat her down and said, "This is your grandmother's signature move. Please replicate it for the cameras." And yet TikTok users comparing footage of Charlotte and Diana concluded the young princess looks a lot like her late grandmother, with comment sections lighting up over what people started calling the killer stare. One commenter said flatly that the resemblance felt uncanny. Another said Charlotte had clearly inherited the side eye. Here's why this matters beyond just being a cute internet moment. Diana's expression wasn't really about her face. It was about what the face was covering up. People who worked with her early on, including her ballet tutor, who started teaching her in the early 1980s, described Diana as someone who, on first meeting, radiated a huge shyness until you spent enough time with her to see how much depth was underneath it. The stare was shyness wearing armor. It let Diana walk into a room full of strangers and cameras without looking like she was falling apart inside, even on days when she probably was. So when royal watchers say Charlotte has the Spencer stare, they're not just talking bone structure. Fans have pointed out that Charlotte often displays a composed, slightly shy expression in public, frequently looking upward through her lashes with a subtle tilt of her head. The same defense mechanism showing up 2 generations later in a kid who spent her entire life being photographed since before she could walk. It's worth remembering that Charlotte didn't choose this life any more than Diana did. Diana married into a family that turned every public appearance into a spectacle, and she had to build coping mechanisms on the fly in front of the entire world. Starting at 19 years old, Charlotte was born into it. There was no before for her. No ordinary childhood she can compare royal life to, the way Diana had one before. 1981. That's actually the opposite trajectory. Diana had a private life and lost it. Charlotte never had one to lose, and yet the same defensive expression shows up in both of them, which tells you something. Whatever produces that stare isn't really about circumstance. It might just be temperament handed down. And it's not only the eyes. A body language expert speaking to the Daily Express years ago drew a direct line between grandmother and granddaughter on exactly this point. Judy James said both Charlotte and Diana initially come across as shy, but once they warm up, both reveal an outgoing, cheerful personality underneath. James went further, noting that Charlotte gives the same initial impression of shyness that Diana did, with an outgoing, fun personality showing through once that shyness lifts, and that Charlotte even scans the cameras with her eyes the way Diana always used to. That detail is easy to miss, but it's actually the most telling one. Diana didn't just tolerate cameras, she worked them, consciously picking out lenses and giving them something to capture. If Charlotte is doing the same thing at 7, 8, 9 years old, that's not passive resemblance. That's active instinct. So here's where this story actually starts to build. A stare is one thing. A stare is skin deep, genetics, bone structure, maybe some mirrored behavior picked up from old photographs and videos the family keeps around the house. But William and Kate didn't just let a resemblance happen by accident. They made a decision right at Charlotte's birth that tied her formally and permanently to her grandmother's memory. And once you understand why they made that decision, the rest of the traits, the ballet, the shyness that turns into warmth, the eye for a camera, start to look less like coincidence and more like something that was, in a quiet way, built into her from day one. That decision is where we go next. When Princess Charlotte was born in May 2015, her full name became Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, two grandmothers, one name each. But everyone paid attention to the third one. Prince William chose to honor his mother's legacy by giving Charlotte her name as a middle name. And it wasn't a small gesture buried in a birth certificate. It was William, publicly and deliberately making sure his mother's name lived inside his daughter's permanently on every official document she'll ever sign for the rest of her life. To understand why that mattered so much to William, you have to go back to who Diana actually was as a mother, not just as a public figure. This is the part that gets skipped over in a lot of the "she looks like Diana" content, but it's the part that actually explains everything that came after. Diana was famously unconventional as a royal parent. She broke from generations of royal tradition by insisting on being hands-on. She personally put her sons to bed and stayed closely involved in their daily routines, rather than handing that work over to palace staff, which was not how royal children had typically been raised for centuries. She once described her own parenting philosophy in words that stuck with people for decades, saying she wanted to raise her boys with security and that she hugged her children constantly and fed them love and affection because she believed it mattered that much. But the detail that connects directly to this story is what Diana did with William and Harry outside the palace walls. She regularly took both boys on private visits to homeless shelters, AIDS hospices, and charitable organizations, hoping they'd understand hardship firsthand instead of growing up shielded by royal privilege. This wasn't for photo opportunities. These were private visits, deliberately kept out of the press, because Diana wasn't doing it for optics. She was doing it because she believed her sons needed to understand that a world existed beyond palace gates and that the people in it were dealing with things far harder than anything a young prince would ever face. William has credited those childhood visits with shaping his lifelong commitment to tackling homelessness, a cause he still works on as an adult, decades after those private trips with his mother. Harry has said something similar, that Diana showed both of them how ordinary people lived, giving them a perspective that let them connect naturally with the public for the rest of their lives. This is the piece that turns a nice name choice into something bigger. William didn't just want his daughter to carry his mother's name as a tribute. He grew up being shaped directly and intentionally by a woman who believed that royal children should be taught empathy the hard way, by seeing real hardship, not just hearing about it in a briefing. When William decided to fold Diana into his daughter's name, he wasn't only preserving a memory. He was making a statement about what kind of parent he intended to be, and what kind of person he hoped his daughter would grow into. And there's a reason that statement carries extra weight. Diana never got the chance to meet any of her grandchildren. She died in a Paris car crash in August 1997, when William was 15 years old. Everything Charlotte has of her grandmother comes secondhand, through William's memories, through home videos, through the same charitable causes the family still supports, and through whatever genetics decided to carry forward on their own. There was no direct relationship to lean on. Whatever resemblance exists had to travel through William first. That's exactly why the ballet detail that keeps surfacing in royal reporting matters so much. It's not just cute coincidence that they both like dance. It's a hobby that had to be actively introduced to Charlotte by parents who knew, better than almost anyone, exactly what that hobby had meant to Diana. And once you see how deliberately William and Kate handled the name, you start to wonder whether the ballet lessons were placed in front of Charlotte just as deliberately, or whether she found her way there entirely on her own, the same way Diana did. That's the next question, and the answer says a lot about how much of this is inheritance and how much of it is upbringing. Here's a detail that keeps resurfacing every time this comparison comes up. Both Diana and Charlotte were drawn to ballet, independently decades apart, without ever meeting. Diana's relationship with dance started young and ran deep. As a young girl in Norfolk, she dreamed of becoming a professional ballerina and hoped to perform with the Royal Ballet, but she eventually grew too tall to continue pursuing it seriously, reportedly reaching close to 5'11". That dream didn't disappear just because her body didn't cooperate. Shortly after marrying Prince Charles, she started taking private dance lessons, and her love of the art form followed her for the rest of her life. Her former ballet tutor, who began working with her in the early 1980s, later described in a documentary how Diana's initial shyness gave way, class by class, to something that clearly meant a great deal to her. Now look at Charlotte. Kate Middleton first revealed her daughter's passion for ballet publicly back in 2017, saying flatly that Charlotte absolutely loved it. And William later confirmed the same thing, describing his daughter running around the kitchen in her dresses and ballet gear. That's not a one-off comment. Years later, reporting indicated that a then 9-year-old Charlotte was still attending weekly private ballet lessons at a dance school in South London. This wasn't a phase she grew out of. It stuck. And there's a specific moment that shows exactly how much this hobby means to her. During one of Kate's Christmas Carol services, the family arranged for dancers from the Royal Ballet to perform as a surprise, kept secret from Charlotte in advance. Kate had to enlist Charlotte's younger brother, Prince Louis, to help keep the secret, telling him she wanted it to be a surprise for Charlotte because of how much she loves her ballet, and Louis promised not to say anything. Louis kept his word, and Charlotte got to watch professional dancers perform at Westminster Abbey without knowing it was coming. A moment where she was seen admiring the dancers from the Royal Ballet during the service. Why does a shared hobby matter to a story about inherited traits? Because ballet isn't just a pastime, it's a window into personality. It requires discipline, physical control, and a comfort with being watched while doing something vulnerable and expressive. Diana's ballet teacher noted that what looked like shyness on the surface gave way to something much more emotionally invested once class started. That's almost exactly the same pattern body language experts have picked up on when they describe Charlotte. Initial reserve, then warmth and personality once she settles in. The ballet isn't separate from the personality trait, it's an expression of it. A shy kid who also happens to love performing in front of an audience once she trusts the room. But here's where the story needs to widen out. Because up to this point, everything has been about resemblance, how Charlotte looks, moves, and reacts. The bigger question is what kind of royal she's actually going to become. Diana wasn't remembered for a stare or a ballet class. She was remembered for what she did with her position once she had the freedom to use it. And that's where this comparison gets a lot more interesting, because Charlotte, unlike Diana, isn't going to spend decades stuck as a junior royal with no real platform. She's third in line to the throne, behind only her father and her older brother, and eventually she's going to have a public role of her own to define. So the next question isn't, does Charlotte look like Diana? It's, does Charlotte act like Diana when it actually counts? In the moments where compassion becomes a choice rather than a family resemblance. Diana's defining trait was never really her looks, and it wasn't ballet either. It was what she did with proximity to suffering. She used her position to get physically close to people the world preferred to ignore, and that decision reshaped an entire era of how the monarchy operated. The clearest example is still the handshake. In April 1987, Diana shook hands with an AIDS patient without wearing gloves, at a time when the disease carried enormous stigma and most people, including plenty of public figures, wouldn't get anywhere near a patient for fear of contagion that medical science had already disproven, but the public hadn't caught up to. That handshake became a defining moment in the fight against the fear surrounding the disease, because Diana wasn't performing compassion from a safe distance. She was choosing direct contact in public, knowing exactly how it would read. That pattern repeated everywhere she went. She visited homeless shelters, drug rehabilitation centers, and hospitals, and she consistently took the time to actually speak with people and hear their individual stories, rather than doing a brief photo op and moving on. Her landmine campaign followed the same instinct. She walked through an active minefield in Angola in January 1997, cameras rolling, not because it made good TV, but because she wanted the world to see exactly what those weapons did to the people living around them. Her advocacy helped build momentum toward the Ottawa Treaty, which went on to ban landmines across more than 160 countries, though she died before she ever saw it signed. The point isn't just that Diana did charity work. Plenty of royals do that. The point is how she did it. Her compassion was described as deeply personal rather than symbolic because she consistently engaged directly with people affected by illness, poverty, and stigma, relying on empathy over protocol. She broke from the tradition of royals maintaining polite distance, and in doing so, she changed what the public expected from the monarchy going forward. Now, here's the honest part of this story. The part that keeps this from being pure hagiography, passed down through a bloodline. Diana wasn't a flawless parent, and some who covered the family closely at the time offered a more complicated picture. One royal biographer, writing about William and Harry's upbringing, suggested that Diana's emotional openness sometimes weighed heavily on her sons, that William, as a boy, reportedly asked her directly why she was always crying, and that the strain of her very public marital breakdown left an impression that went beyond simple admiration. That same account acknowledged the boys were proud of the charity work their mother did, work they still point to today, even while the surrounding family drama was difficult for children to process. That complexity is part of the real story too. Diana's compassion and her personal turmoil existed side by side, not as competing narratives, but as two things that were both true about the same woman at the same time. So where does Charlotte fit into that picture? She's 10 years old as of the most recent birthday reporting on the family, now 11 as of this year, and she hasn't been handed anything close to Diana's public causes yet. That's not how it works for a child, third in line to the throne, whose engagements are still tightly limited and mostly ceremonial. But the instincts people around her describe point in a very specific direction. William and Kate have made mental health and youth well-being signature causes of their own working lives, and reports on Charlotte's future schooling have noted that her parents have shown particular interest in options with a strong emphasis on student well-being and mental health support, a priority they've championed publicly for years. That's not proof that Charlotte will become a hands-on humanitarian the way her grandmother was. It's a household orientation. The causes Charlotte is growing up around are the same family of causes Diana pushed into the mainstream first. And that raises the real stakes of this whole story. A stare can be genetic. A love of ballet can be a shared taste. But taking on Diana's actual legacy, the willingness to get close to hard things, to use a royal platform for something uncomfortable rather than safe, that's not inherited automatically. That has to be chosen deliberately. The same way William chose to put his mother's name on his daughter's birth certificate, which means the real question about Charlotte isn't in the past. It's in what happens over the next several years as she moves from being a child who resembles her grandmother into a young royal who will eventually have to decide what kind of public figure she wants to be. That decision is still ahead of her, but the groundwork for it, where she's being educated, who's shaping her, and what she's already shown flashes of, is happening right now. So where does all of this leave Charlotte right now at this exact point in her life? She's currently attending Lambrook School in Berkshire, the same prep school her brothers George and Louis have gone through, a school that takes children from ages 3 to 13. She's described by people close to the family as sporty, athletic, and a keen runner, a detail that doesn't map onto Diana directly, but does show a kid who's comfortable being active and visible, not someone retreating from attention. And her parents are already deep into planning her next move. Earlier this year, reporting indicated William and Kate had begun exploring secondary schools for her, including Wellington College and Marlborough College, Kate's own alma mater. More recent reporting narrowed that further, with a source describing a visit William, Kate, and Charlotte made together to Oundle School, touring the grounds, and having lunch at one of its boarding houses for older girls. Whatever the family ultimately decides, the timeline is real. Charlotte will move to secondary school at 13, and the version of her the public sees is about to change with it. That transition matters for this story, because it's the first moment Charlotte will start operating, with slightly more independence from her parents' direct supervision. New environment, new people, a step further from the protected bubble of early childhood. It's roughly the same stage of life where Diana's own influence on William was already fully formed, well before he ever expected to lose her. Diana didn't get the luxury of shaping her sons into adulthood. She built the foundation early and then ran out of time. Charlotte has something Diana's own sons didn't get to keep past their teenage years: a grandmother's influence delivered secondhand through a father who's had decades to decide exactly which parts of his mother's approach he wanted to pass forward deliberately rather than by accident. And that's really the answer sitting underneath everything in this story. The stare is real. Royal Watchers keep circulating side-by-side images and video edits, highlighting the resemblance around Charlotte's eyes and head tilt. And it isn't going away as she gets older. If anything, it becomes more noticeable in formal settings where the stakes of a camera flash feel higher than they did when she was a toddler. The ballet is real, a hobby Diana loved as a girl before her height ended her own ambitions. Now living on in weekly lessons, a continent's worth of royal protocol away from where Diana first fell for it. The shyness into warmth pattern that body language experts flagged years ago is still the read people give her at public events. And the causes surrounding her upbringing, mental health, well-being, the kind of hands-on parenting Diana insisted on decades before it was normal for royals to parent that way, all trace straight back to a woman Charlotte never got to sit in a room with. None of that happened because Charlotte set out to recreate her grandmother. A 10-year-old doesn't study old documentary footage and decide to copy someone's expressions. What happened is simpler and, honestly, more interesting. William spent his whole life inside his mother's version of parenting, absorbed it as a child without necessarily realizing it was being absorbed, and then applied the same instincts to his own 3 kids without needing to force the resemblance. The stare might be genetics. The ballet might be genetics too, for all anyone can prove. But the household Charlotte is growing up in, the one where empathy gets modeled rather than lectured, where charity work happens quietly instead of for cameras, where mental health gets named as a priority instead of avoided. That part isn't an accident of DNA. That part is William closing a loop his mother started and never got to finish. Diana didn't live to see any of her grandchildren born. She never got to watch Charlotte take a ballet class, never got to see the stare turn up on a 10-year-old's face at a public engagement, never got to weigh in on which secondary school might suit her granddaughter best. Everything connecting them had to travel through memory, through a middle name on a birth certificate, through the causes William and Kate chose to prioritize because of what they'd watched their own mother do first. And somehow across that distance, enough got through that people who study old footage for a living keep landing on the same conclusion. Whatever made Diana didn't disappear in 1997. It just skipped a generation, quietly, and kept going.